questions on transport routes following an Alpine fault earthquake. So Claire asked, I saw something recently about the Otira Viaduct being taken out in an Alpine fault AF8 earthquake. Do we know which roads will receive the most damage? Where are we likely to be cut off in the South Island and how long for? And related to that, Greg would like to know, with AF8, the road and rail links to the East Coast will most likely be cut off for weeks at a time, weeks at least. This will mean shipping and supplies to the West Coast. Modern ships cannot access our harbours except maybe HMNZS Canterbury. Is anything being done to ready one of our harbours for this emergency role? So Liam, you're the infrastructure guy. What are the likely impacts of an Alpine fault earthquake to our South Island roads? Are we talking something similar following an Alpine fault quake? And if the roads are damaged, is there any work being done to look at port alternatives?
Yeah, thanks for that. So for the road question first, I think we often focus our eyes on bridges as one of the first targets, but sometimes forget about all of the large slopes that surround all our roads. So what we can learn quite a bit from is from the Kaikoura earthquake in terms of what we saw there. So the Kaikoura earthquake, we saw quite a bit of shaking along the coast, clearly a large amount of landslides. There was a number of bridges that had quite significant damage, but actually most of those bridges were in use or could be in use fairly soon after the event. So the bridges are probably not the weakest link in the network. The weakest link in the network is likely the landslides that would develop. And so if we look at the Kaikoura earthquake as an example of one stretch of road, we've got a much larger area that's going to be affected by strong shaking in an Alpine fault event. And what we expect to see is, depending on what the event brings us, is most of the passes from the east to the west across the Alps will be impacted in that sort of way with large volumes of landslides along those roads. So understanding that that's going to be the case, there has been work to look at of those different links, which is the ones that are going to be the least impacted, and try to identify what would be a strategy to actually start to remove some of those that volume of landslides to get that linkage, which is the key linkage really from one side of the Alps to the other. And that could be a fair period of time. And again, the Kaikoura earthquake is a good one to look back at, is how long it took to actually reinstate some of those routes. So could be a fair amount of time that the West Coast is going to be isolated, as Carolina mentioned before, from other parts of the country. So we know that that's going to be a key challenge, is the landslide of the transport system. Therefore, linking to the other side, which is traveling on the ocean. Yes, it's a very topical aspect right now, and there is actually work going on pretty much this week to try to explore how some of those other alternate routes, and we're thinking of air routes and sea routes, could be utilized to bring in the required supply, support, and assistance for the response and the recovery aspects on the West Coast. So there is actually a few different ships that have been identified that are in service across the country that we think could be used at some of those different port locations, and really trying to explore what would be the mechanisms around enabling those to bring kit into those ports, and at the same time how to deal with the potential damage that might occur at those ports themselves. So there's things like liquefaction, shaking damage. Some of those ports are a little bit old and need a bit of work on them. So if they're going to see damage, is there ways you could get around that damage to still enable that? So that's the sort of stuff that's ongoing, to try to understand. We need a multi-pronged approach to how we get material supplies and people into the West Coast to assist following an Alpine fault event.
Thanks, Liam.